All right, so welcome to our inspired week talk, our first one for today. 10 questions every parent must ask their child's teacher. Oops. Okay, so just a little bit of background on me. So I grew up in Vancouver. I've been a teacher since 2014. I first started teaching at a public school back home in Vancouver called Charles Dickens, and that was a multi-age grouping, so it kind of gave me a really good sense of differentiation, especially in my first year. Then I moved on to teach at my former school. I went there from kindergarten to grade 12, York House, and then I taught at West Point Grey Academy. And so those are both two of the top independent schools in Vancouver. So I felt really lucky to have that experience, especially so young. And then I came to Hong Kong, and then I was lucky enough to land at Baker and Bloom. So I'm really excited because I feel like our ideology is very similar. And yeah, it's a good place to be for Hong Kong. It makes sure that every child is learning kind of the right fundamentals and kind of the life skills of the future as well. So it's just a little blurb about me. So I grew up in Vancouver. I first started, my first teaching kind of experience was in coaching. So I coached starting in grade 8, started off with basketball and then moved on to track and field. And for me, I think that coaching experience really helped me as an educator because I was able to actually teach to the specific child, teach to the specific need, because when you're coaching, you're not just coaching a general team as a whole, you're actually coaching every individual. So I feel like that actually really shaped my practices as a teacher. All right, so just a little bit about what we do at Baker and Bloom. So our whole idea is to teach creative literacy. So that was the fundamental start, which is why our IRW program is, I think, very special in terms of everything that's happening in Hong Kong. We use a 4-leaf approach, which is different from other centers and other educational experiences. We make sure that obviously the love of learning, the love of language and creativity are in our lessons, but we also value leadership and experience. So we also feel that when you make the experience like meaningful, then the children are more likely to remember and actually understand it as a whole. All right, so you're probably wondering, this is a pretty aggressive title, the 10 questions you must ask. So why do we have to ask these questions? So for me, from my experience as a teacher, I think that these questions will just ensure that the parent-teacher relationship is off to a really good start. I think that at the beginning of the year, it's really important for students to feel protected and safe, especially at the beginning. Emotions are high for kids, for teachers, for parents, everybody. So just to guarantee that there is that pathway for like easy and difficult conversations, just for the sake of the student, and making sure that we're putting the student first. So these questions, I wanted to make sure that it's just like 10 most important questions to ask, obviously not at the same time, just at various points at the beginning of the year, because I know that as parents, you guys are all really busy. And these questions will help you have just a really efficient start to the year. And it'll help you ask for the information that's actually relevant and will actually help your child, you know? So I want to make sure that you save your own time, make sure that it's getting right to the point, and it's going to help your child have a great start to the year. All right, so the first question, how do you assess student progress? So this is the question that you would ask the teacher, because there are 2 types of assessments. So there's formative and there's summative. So I think someone actually submitted a question that was about how often teachers should be testing students. And for me as a teacher, I think that the little check-in points, I used to call them like when you go to a doctor, you go for a doctor's checkup, and it's not like the end all examination. It's not like that. It's like that one health checkup is going to summarize your entire life. So you're just going there as a checkup point for that time period in your life. So whenever I tell the kids, oh, it's going to be a little bit of a pop quiz, it is a pop quiz. I'm just testing for your understanding, and I'm testing to see if what I'm doing is working for you. So those kinds of tests are the most important in my opinion. And then you have those are the formative ones. So they're just kind of forming an opinion, and the summative ones are the ones that are summary. So that kind of helps, I think maybe like as a parent, put into perspective the types of assessments that your child will have to do. So maybe in the beginning of the year, asking for a syllabus or kind of just a heads up on when those reporting periods will be. So then you can efficiently kind of place into your time when you need to be there to support your child a little bit more. So in my opinion, I think that the learning really should happen at school or at education centers, because then you can keep home as a safe place for your child to just develop other life skills. So you're not putting on yourself the burden of, it's just a healthier for relationships in general. And I think when you ask your child's teacher about the formative and summative assessments, or at least when the assessment periods will be, it will give you a fuller picture as a parent for you to plan and map out the important dates that might be of higher stress. Because I think that if you as a parent, you're modeling control and organization in front of your child is also more likely to pick up those similar habits. So I think it's just a really good way to kind of demonstrate how you handle, I guess, time management, and just hopefully your kids will also start to pick up those skills as well. All right, so question number 2. What one thing should I help my child improve and work on? So I think that this one is very important because it's like the year it's a very long experience, right? And so the answer that your teacher gives you, or your child's teacher will give you at the beginning of the year, might not last for the entire year. So this might change throughout the year, but except at least it gives you a general focal point for what to encourage at home. So it could be academic, or it could just be one of those fundamental life skills like following directions, following routines. Maybe it is literacy or something academic, but at least you have that one thing to focus on, not stress over, just to help reinforce at home. So at least it gives you a focal point, it gives your child a focal point, and it doesn't feel like they have a lot. It's just overwhelming to do. So yeah, I think that it's important to have a targeted approach, because multitasking is really difficult, especially for children. Their brains haven't quite developed yet. So by having that focus point, kids will be able to make better choices, prioritize, and absorb information more easily. All right, sorry. Number 3. So what can I do to support the work that you're doing in the classroom? I think this one is a really important one. At least when I was a classroom teacher, for a parent to reach out and let them know that they're on my side, I think that really helped, and it alleviated a little bit more of a little bit less, like it just had opened up the pathways for stronger communication. Starting off with your on a good place with your teacher or with your child's teacher is really important. Because it just helps your teacher, oh my gosh, your child's teacher feel more supported, and it's easier for them to have those conversations with you if it needs to happen. So first impression is really important. And in order to support, I guess, the child at home, these are some do's and don'ts that you can keep in mind. So this is from an article in the New York Times. So some of their do's are to focus on the process, not the product, to encourage kids to self-advocate, to keep a long-term perspective, to maintain a healthy sleep schedule, and to love the child you have, not the child you wish you had. And I think that does help a lot in terms of just keeping things into perspective and just really grounding yourself. Some of their don'ts from the article, it says, don't overschedule, don't worship grades, don't encourage helplessness, don't compare kids to one another, and to love kids based on their performance. And I think those are the things that we keep in mind as teachers too. So I think to have that consistency at home, that would be really important. All right. Question number 4, what's the best way to contact you? So this one's really important because sometimes at the end of the day, that might be the only chance that you get to see your child's teacher in person, and pulling them aside and having a trickier conversation with them at that time is a little bit stressful because, you know, it's chaotic pickup time. So I guess as a parent, you want to make sure that you have that communication line established. Maybe it's best to contact over email or a phone call, or even just setting up an appointment. Those are ways that you can actually make sure that everybody is on the same page in terms of how to communicate with each other. So when you do book an appointment with your child's teacher, maybe it's something really simple, or you have a question about something, but I think appointments are best because it gives the teacher the time to actually process their thoughts and to really make sure that the conversation is focused on the child and not on anything else in particular. So when you have that appointment, organize your thoughts, maybe have a note of the one thing that you want to bring up or the points that you want to bring up. So at least the conversation is targeted and focused. Communicate effectively. Make sure it's a two-way street. So at least the conversation, you hear the side of the teacher, the perspective of the teacher, what they know about the situation, and you bring up the points that you want to bring up about how it actually is at home, because I feel like it is really important for the teachers to know the home background as well. So, and always keep the conversation focused on discussing the next steps or finding the solution. So having an actionable plan at least helps the teacher kind of find the point from A to B, and in turn it helps move the conversation along a little bit more so that it's focused on helping the child in particular. Yeah, so in general, just be positive, foster that sense of trust, communicate often, acknowledge involvement, and don't make assumptions. The teachers I'm sure will try their best to do the same thing, but I do think it's important to have that communication line open so that the conversation happens really effectively and efficiently. All right, number 5. So what are the most important ideas or concepts my child has to understand by the end of the year? So the previous question asked about a general focal point. So that one was more about, like, it could be social, it could be academic, but this one is focused purely on the academic. So the reason why it's important to have kind of the end goal in mind is, for us as teachers, one of the ways that we lesson plan is to plan backwards. We consider what are the concepts and the values that we want children to understand at the end of the year, and we work backwards to plan to make sure that that happens. So I think this is very similar in terms of how to help your child at home as well, because if you understand what the end goal is, you can actually think of the ways to support or best support your child at home, because you will be able to see the gaps. So sometimes for students, I put on the right side, there's like 3 parts of the brain that are really important, especially for child development. And I don't think that teachers talk about it enough, and it's really important to actually consider brain development and certain stages of a child's life, because sometimes we assume that they'll hopefully pick it up eventually, but sometimes their brain just isn't ready. So if we consider all the different points of the brain development, it might give us a little bit more patience, or at least figure out how to structure those conversations with our child, or how to best support them. So memory is obviously very important, but these 3 aspects of the brain actually control different parts. So the amygdala is important for emotions and processing those emotions, normally associated with fear. It helps define and regulate emotions, and it helps preserve memories and those attachment to memories. So you might be wondering, why would the emotions be important? But in terms of actually recalling information, that's why we are focused on play, because when the kids are having fun, and they're more likely to remember the information that has been taught. Obviously, fear is associated with this as well, and that might work for some students, but it actually, as a whole, doesn't do the job as well. So we want to make sure that the emotions are regulated. It gives them a better sense of, it's easier for their brain to absorb information like a sponge. So the amygdala is actually important when it comes to brain development and memory. Next part, the hippocampus. So that one purely supports memory and learning and navigation and perception of space. So this one is actually very important. It's the most important part, and it can get damaged by a variety of stimuli. So that's why it's important to make sure that everything is working as a whole for all the parts of the brain. It's not just like working on only this part. And everything develops at a different time, which brings me to the next part, the prefrontal cortex. So that is the last part of the brain in the child to fully develop. So it's the regulating. It helps them regulate with memory, a little bit more flexibility, the cognitive controls. And just if you remember that this is the last step to develop, that's why sometimes everything happens at a different pace for students, for children. So if we keep that in mind, all three aspects of the brain and how the brain develops, especially in a child, depending on what stage in their life they're at, then it helps us in terms of figuring out how to best support the child. All right, number 6. So I know that creativity and innovation, those are really, really popular words in 21st century learning. And I think that it's important for every teacher to incorporate some aspect of it. I know that we all have various experiences for school and how we were educated. For the most part, even from my own personal experiences at school, it was more traditional, especially in the primary years. Still a little bit traditional in the high school years, but that upper primary years, those ones were actually a little bit, that's when we started getting a bit more creative in the lessons. But now what we're hoping, at least, especially for like Bloom Academy and at Baker and Bloom with us, we are all about creativity and innovation and making sure that the classroom experiences are supported by actual experience, like having the kids experience, like doing things, because the kids learn best by actually doing things. So previously I brought up how play is important, and I think that play is something that isn't discussed enough. Children are more likely to retain and make sense and give meaning to information when they are playing, because it's actually them making sense of it for themselves rather than just being told and then memorizing and absorbing. When you're playing or just doing something, they're more likely to remember. So creativity and innovation actually stem from problem solving. So that's something that we like to promote even in literacy. When the kids are writing, we give them little case studies or problems or like scenarios for them to actually try to put themselves in that perspective and figure out how it would be to solve that problem in whatever scenario we give. So problem solving skills builds confidence for the child, because problem solving, we all do it for math, but we can apply it in other subjects as well. Problem solving means making choices. So if children make decisions and choices every single day. So if we give them those chances, it doesn't have to be necessarily academic, but it could develop into a larger conversation later, maybe about social justice, and they bring in more of the humanities aspects. It brings in the English, the language development, the social studies skills, the history, the philosophy, all of it. Problem solving involves more than just one academic skill. So sometimes it could be, how do I make lasting friendships? They have to consider all the different aspects. And for students, if we give them the opportunity to be creative, innovative, do more problem-solving activities, they can become more independent. They have that sense of independence, and they're building these skills that they're going to use for their future careers as well. So giving them a chance to problem solve at an earlier age is really beneficial in terms of giving them that exposure to make good choices in their lives. All right, for number 7, literacy. So I know that that's one of the most common questions that we get asked. How can I best support my child with maybe reading or writing or anything like that at home? So I think for promoting literacy at home, I think that it should be a whole family experience, or at least a group experience where they're not just doing it alone. If they're isolated and it's like almost like it's like a form of punishment, or like, oh, you have to do this, it's a chore, they're less likely to actually want to do it, because it just feels like an extra thing that they have to do. It is that chore, that aspect, right? So if you promote literacy at home, there are many different ways, like a lot of fun ways to actually help them in that aspect. So for young children, maybe like nursery rhymes, audiobooks. I always recommend that audiobooks are really a great way to promote literacy, especially if your child doesn't want to read. Taking away that actual act of reading, but listening to the story, practicing visualization, those are all really important skills that have to do with literacy and reading comprehension. So giving your child that support system to actually just listen and be creative in that way. Audiobooks are a great way. It helps them develop a love of language, understand like more vocabulary, and it helps them build connections and gives them more meaning. It's a great way to just take away the fear of reading if your child is maybe at that point where they're not quite ready to read books by themselves, but they want to have that chance to make those connections and ask questions and predict all those parts that have to do with the reading comprehension. For older children, I think a lot of board games have word games that are really great for children just to practice a higher level vocabulary, just giving them that exposure and that chance to be exposed to vocabulary that's not just maybe their colloquial terms, right? So we can, as a family, you could talk about word meanings, point out interesting new words when you're reading together. Maybe if you're reading the newspaper together or magazine, asking them, oh, did you know what this word meant? Having that discussion. I think doing things together and not alone is one of the most important ways to support literacy at home. And then for adolescents, even maybe bringing in technology to it. So you can use maybe like an iPad, or there are lots of apps that can promote literacy. And I'm going to have a couple suggestions for you guys later, but bringing that family aspect and giving them a literacy rich environment, discussions, and just bringing them into the conversation a little more, especially when they're in the teen years. It's really important to maintain that bond. And you can do that through literacy or stories, whatever way you want to, but just making sure you keep that momentum going as well. All right, so number 7, how can I support literacy at home? What is your perspective on homework? So I know that depending on your school or your classroom teacher, everybody has a different perspective on how homework should be. So if you have that conversation with your child's teacher in advance, I think it just clears up a lot of maybe confusion. Maybe you'd be like, oh, so-and-so doesn't give enough homework, or so-and-so gives too much. If you have that understanding of maybe your teachers, why the teacher is making those decisions, it might help you a little bit more. So it's just a good way to make sure that that everyone is on the same page, so neither party pushes too much. It just clears up a lot of confusion. And number 8, so what is your approach if my child is struggling socially? So I think that with everything that's happened with school over the past couple of years, it is really important for students to be social and to make new friends. So if you are picking up on the vibes that your child is maybe struggling a little bit socially, have that conversation with the teacher. And at home, these are just some ways that you can encourage your child to get out there a little bit more. So I think the first thing to actually tell them is that you won't be everyone's friend. I know growing up, it was just kind of like I wanted to make sure everybody liked me because it just felt important, right? But I think that if you have those conversations and you let them know, like you might not, you're going to try your best to get along with everybody, but at the end of the day, you might not, and that's okay. It might help them feel not so anxious about social situations, because then they don't have to feel like they have to put up a front every time. And the next step would be maybe to model empathy. So we do have some books that are available that help children make connections with characters in text, because I think sometimes that is easier to see that what they're feeling is something that other children could feel as well, making them feel like they're not alone. That's really important. And having those conversations about empathy at home is important as well. And the last step to do at home if your child is struggling socially is to allow a safe space for your child to be vulnerable. Because from a place where they're feeling maybe a little bit not as strong, a little bit not so confident, by giving them that space to express themselves to you, that's the best thing that you could do, because then you can actually support your child and give them little boosts and challenges that don't overextend them, that just give them the right amount of challenge in order to make them a bit more confident as they head into school. Sorry, I went back too quickly. So what questions do you suggest I ask my kids on a daily basis about school? So this is kind of a continuation on that. It's not necessarily if they're struggling socially, but maybe they don't want to share information about, what happened at school. Maybe they shut down, but you're curious because you want to know and you want to best support them. So I have, if you're interested, I do have around 50 questions of ways to get like conversation starters to have to do with your parent, with your child. For example, you say, what made you smile today? But I think the important thing is not necessarily the questions that you ask, but just getting into the routine of having them share information. So these are some questions that could help you in terms of just getting them to open that bridge and have that discussion with you about school. But I think the routine is the most important. So I've listed some examples on the side. It says, what made you smile today? Can you tell me an example of kindness that you saw or that you showed? Because those are, again, those conversations about empathy, and it helps the child understand, and it just helps them with their values too. Was there an example of someone being unkind? How did you respond to that? Does everyone have a friend at recess? That helps them with their observation skills as well. They are starting to realize who is feeling left out and what they could do to help. And what was the book that your teacher read? That's a good conversation starter for maybe literacy, and having those discussions about, what did that text mean? Did you like it? Why did you like it? Why didn't you like it? And then it's just an easy one from there. So open-ended questions, I think, are really important in order to get the information that you would want to know. Great. So number 9, this one's like a really important one, especially with now that we're moving away from online learning. How is learning personalized in your classroom? So for teachers, they call this differentiation. So we as teachers, everyone knows that every child learns in a different way. So differentiation is just a way of instruction, and it appeals to multiple styles of learning. And that's, I think, really important for for everyone to understand. No one is exactly the same, and everybody learns from a variety of different ways. So differentiation can be defined as a way of teaching in which teachers modify the curriculum to make sure that every child has the building blocks to actually understand the material. So most of the time, teachers will differentiate when a task becomes too tricky or difficult and the students are being anxious. So they have that emotional response. Another time, or maybe the activity is too easy. So teachers will differentiate to avoid a child being bored or act out. So again, both boredom and anxiety affect a child's ability to learn. And we don't want to ruin that learning environment. We want to make sure that every child is challenged at the right level for in order to achieve whatever goals they have. So some ways that parents can actually help with differentiation at home, or at least understand it more, is to ask teachers specific ways in which differentiated instruction is provided. So maybe for your child, maybe you're just curious. It's a great conversation to have, just to ask them so that you can be on the same page at home. Maybe you want to know what works best for your child. I think it's also really important to understand that teachers won't be able to differentiate all assignments and materials every day. They still have a classroom to run, and so they will do their best to differentiate all the important concepts and activities, but differentiation doesn't happen at every moment in the classroom, during every moment in the classroom. And I think it's also important for everyone to be on the same page about being competitive. So encouraging students to only challenge themselves and not compete against others or their peers. That's really healthy in terms of mindset. So if you start that from an earlier age, it's far more healthy for them, especially as they reach the teen years when everybody is naturally competitive. It's just a given, but not to foster that, because it could get a little bit unhealthy for the child as well. And another way, if you really want to see how differentiation or how the classroom runs, is to volunteer in the classroom if your school allows for that. I think that's a great way to just see your child in the action, to see how things are taught and how your child works best. All right, so I wanted to kind of go through, and this is just a little bit of a slide that talks about what differentiation is and what differentiation isn't. I think that it is important. It's something that teachers talk about all the time. It's something that we talk about here because as a learning center, we have students from a range of schools, and no one is ever taught exactly the same. Even within the same school, they all come with their own learning needs, their own goals, and their own strengths as well. So for us at an education center, I think differentiation is just built into our curriculum and how we teach. So I think that is something that is really valuable about all our teachers here. Everybody has that natural knack for differentiation just because of what we do and how our system is kind of run. So differentiation is having a high expectations for all your students. You adjust the core content. You assign activities that are geared towards different learning styles, interests, and levels of thinking, providing students with choices about what and how they can learn. Flexible, because teachers move in and out of groups based on students' instructional needs. So I want to talk about flexible learning a little bit, because especially when we're brainstorming how for Bloom Academy, we talked about flexible, making sure that it was child-centered in almost everything every concept, every aspect of the school, from the furniture to the lessons to the way that the learning cycle goes, everything was made sure that the child was put first. And then the teacher's job was to best support their needs and how we wanted the child to reach the goals at the end of the year. So I think that mindset is really important in terms of if your child's teacher is already doing those things, then I'm sure that the differentiation is already naturally happening. I'll continue on for here. So to assess, to determine student growth and their new needs, adjustment of curriculum by complexity, breadth, and rate. So not making sure that it's like the child must conform to the curriculum. The curriculum is flexible, like in terms of how you teach it, the expectations might not be, but in terms of how you teach it, there is flexibility to it. So for teachers, most teachers are quite good at finding the places where we can bend it to make sure that every child is learning. And lastly, educational experiences which extend, replace, or supplement the standard curriculum. So that's something that we do for B&B, for Baker and Bloom, because we have the targets that we want to meet, but every activity is just a focus on that, and we level it according to what the child can do and what, as a teacher's perspective, what goals we think they should be working towards. All right, so one of the last questions before we move on, what are common barriers to overall classroom success that you often see? So I think that barriers to learning happen no matter if you're in preschool, a child at school, or maybe you're going to work. If it's your first day of work, there are barriers. Like everybody has their own natural little obstacles, right? So I think just to keep in mind that barriers just are a part of life, and we just need to problem solve and have those skills in order to try to figure out how to make those barriers, or at least how to just get over them, right? But for a child, we need to make sure that we ourselves are conscious. And that's why having conversations with your child's teacher is super important, because it helps you strengthen the bond between school and home. And that's how these barriers can be squashed. So one of the first ones, these are just some of the barriers that I think are the most common in terms of for especially elementary school children and high school children. So I'm going to start off with motivation. So there's a few reasons why motivation that's one of the most common barriers for learning. Inspiration, distractions, a lack of drive, a lack of interest, that all impacts the way a child processes information, right? So whenever you're actually enthusiastic about something, you're more likely to learn, or at least have that intrinsic motivation to learn. So for you guys at home, having an understanding of how your child works and what their interests are, that's really helpful. And if you can share anything to pass on that information to your child's teacher. Maybe for instance, your child is really interested in like the mechanics of how things work, maybe like transportation. So that's something that you could share with your child's teacher if you're if your child's teacher has a conversation with you about like, oh, I don't know if he's completely interested in this. What are some interests that he or she has? And then you can do your part to share. And that helps the teacher make more of a personalized learning experience, or at least help bridge that, for your child to understand that concept at school. The next one, I think a lack of previous knowledge. So gaps in knowledge, that's going to happen naturally, especially as we start this new school year. Hopefully everything runs as planned, but given how things were for the previous school year, I'm sure that there's just gaps in knowledge. It's just a given. Every school year will have that. So I think that if you already know where those gaps are, if you communicate that to your child's teacher a little earlier, it will help your child get the support that they need, because your child's teacher will already know what to look out for. I know for me, when I do coaching, the parents I will ask them, what are some of the learning needs? What are the gaps? What are the goals that you have in mind? And the parents are really upfront, and I really appreciate that, because it helps me. It's not a guessing game, and I don't waste my time planning something or trying to assess where their gaps are when it's already been communicated. So it helps. It just makes things a lot more efficient. And just having those conversations about these common barriers, it only helps your child. Next would be learning environment. So I think this is especially important given how we're doing online learning. I would talk to parents about how it's really important that the setup is conducive for learning. Sometimes it's not just physical in terms of learning environment, though. It is like maybe emotional barriers. So as long as we have those conversations about maybe what your child is feeling a little bit insecure about, or maybe their fears, if you have those uncomfortable conversations with your child is going to be upfront with you, and you are going to be able to do your best to help support that at home. And then you can also let your child's teacher know that, oh, so-and-so is feeling a little bit nervous about this concept. And then your child's teacher will be able to be a little bit more sensitive towards it. And then it's just a better learning environment in general. And lastly, I guess learning style. That's another big one that I wanted to really go into. There is no, it's not one way of just learning, right? So one way that I used to start the beginning of my year is to make sure that we did these activities where we determined if we were a visual learner, an auditory, or a kinesthetic learner. What type of learner are you? And we did things with perspective, and we had those conversations with the kids, and the kids would realize they'd say, oh, I'm a visual learner right off the bat. They just said that they're grade 3. They're like, I'm a visual person. And I'm like, oh, really, are you? So it's fine if they say that they are, but through the activity, they'll realize that they actually depend on all the different types of learning. It's not just they rely on one, they rely on maybe one more, a little like more, but all of them have to work together in order to make meaning. So just telling them that there is no one way, that's just one right way of learning, maybe instead of just expecting that they will just pick up on something just visually, understanding that they might need the visual aspect, they might need the auditory, but most of the time the kinesthetic, the actual like way of them doing the learning by doing, that is the most important. So learning styles, being sensitive to your child's particular learning style, but also making sure that they're activating all the different learning styles. That's the one way that they're going to make meaning of all the lessons that they're being taught. And I actually have a bonus one for you guys. So the last question that you could ask your child's teacher is, how can I help you? So for me personally, even if it wasn't like a how can I help you conversation, just making sure that that it was clearly communicated that the parents of my students were on my side, it helped me a lot more in terms of comfort level. Teachers do have a lot on their plates, a lot of students, sometimes like really hectic days, and sometimes they don't have the support that they really need in the classroom. So if there's a way that you can support your teacher, it's to have really good communication between home and school. So I wanted to just pull some stats from Johns Hopkins, a research report. So when there is good communication between parents and teachers, academic performance increases. So things like comprehension and fluency improve when there's parental involvement. And so, and even more so, especially when parents spend time reading with their children. So that's why I feel like it's really like the number one thing basically for all these questions is just to improve communication at home, because ultimately it only helps your child. These are just different questions that that help open those doors for conversations, and everything is entirely student-centered. I think also another one is that parental involvement improves teacher performance. It gives a better understanding for the teacher to understand the students and the student makeup in their class. And it also, when parents talk to their the teacher, it feels like they're not alone in this. And to have that support and know that you're on their side, that's going to make the biggest difference, because it's going to make the teacher feel supported as well. So at the end of the day, these conversations only help in terms of helping your child have the best school year yet. Okay, So in terms of, I don't have any more of the tips or questions, but I do have some resources because I did mention about how it's important to have literacy at home. So I know back home we used Epic a lot in the classrooms. Epic is a great way for students to actually discover a love of learning on their own. It is an app they use on their iPads, and it is a for schools if they use it. It's a free thing, but at home it might be you would have to download it and pay a little bit for it. There's also Raz Kids and Books. So Books is a great one because it's not like they're watching TV, but they're watching the animated stories come to life. So instead of an audiobook where the child has to visualize what's happening in the story, which I think is really important, Books will read the story aloud and have the animation come to life. So that's like a stepping stone towards audiobooks where maybe your child needs a little bit of help with the visualizing or at least picturing in their mind. These are all great ways to support literacy needs at home. If your child needs specific help with support for writing, these are three that I think would be really helpful. They all actually, excuse me, and they all touch on different aspects of writing. So handwriting without tears is actually for those that need practice with letter development. So something I've noticed is that I don't think students are actually learning the correct way for letter formation. So handwriting without tears, you can use it for both printing and cursive. It's just a great way to reinforce how to form the letters properly. And it just makes sure that the foundational habits are solidified. So if your child needs a little bit of help with that, this is a great program to use at home. It's effortless. It's handwriting without tears. I used to use it in classroom for us when we were teaching cursive, and our kindergarten program used to use it as well for letter formation. The next one is Night Zookeeper. So that's a really great one for creative writing. So if your child is interested in creative writing and writing stories, this is a really great one. It also helps with vocabulary, spelling, grammar, and other aspects of writing. This one is geared for more students age 6 to 12 because it does rely on the fact that you write. And lastly, writing A to Z. So it's just like a subsection of the Raz Kids, the reading A to Z. And they have lots of programs where you can just download materials at home. It's like a step-by-step writing guide that offers structure, and it's a great way to just reinforce the things that teachers have been talking about at school. So if you need extra materials to kind of support your child at home that aren't like a workbook or something overly strict, these are really fun ways to keep your child motivated. I took out the reading portion from the comprehension portion because I do think that it's important that we separate the two. Sometimes they just need the fluency part for the literacy, and other times they need more of the maybe sequencing or understanding what happens in a story, actually understanding the meaning of the story. So these are some ways that you can kind of reinforce that at home as well. So Spark Reading, they have, it not only improves the reading skills, but it also has lessons and activities that are catered towards building up your child's ability to read and holistically, so actually understanding the information. Another one would be Skyberry. So Skyberry is an interactive ebook, and they have videos and ways that make the material go further for comprehension, just meaning making. And then lastly, Brain Pop. So Brain Pop, there's Brain Pop and there's Brain Pop Junior. These are all great ways for introducing something new, maybe something that your child needs a little bit of help on, but you don't maybe know how to best explain it. So they have different categories in math, English, social studies, pretty much any subject. There's a video to introduce the concept, and there's let's see, like there's a comprehension part where they can do quizzes, an easy and hard quiz, some extension activities, a writing activity. There's just a lot of ways that are fun to extend the lesson so that at the end, your child is actually comprehending the material, making sense of it, making meaning of it. And then last ones, these ones are really great for leadership needs. So I did talk about if your child is struggling socially or any of those aspects. So if that is the case, Kid Coach app is a really good one. It's one exercise a day, easy. It can make a really big difference for your child's development. I think that everybody wants their child to develop leadership skills in whatever form that may be. So it's a very easy one to have at home, 5 minutes, no prep. Your child can pretty much do it on their own, but it's also a great conversation starter at the dinner table to have those discussions about these values as well. And then Lumosity is a great one for training the brain. So this one is designed for the older students, 13 and above, but it's, again, I talked about problem solving skills and how creativity and innovation are really important for the future. So these are a series of app activities that are catered towards brain development and concentration, problem solving skills, memory, all of the things that I think kids need. And it's a great way to reinforce that at home as well. And lastly, Sketcher. So Sketch AR is, it's actually a drawing app. So I'm actually putting this in here because a lot of the time your child is maybe really great and wants to write creative stories. And Sketcher is a really great way to just kind of illustrate and support the text. Or I know this is a little bit of a controversial thing, but when I was doing read alouds for a chapter book as a whole group in the classroom, I would allow for the students to sketch. Sketching actually activates part of the brain where it kind of releases a bit of, I think, dopamine, where they are calmer, they're happier, and they're actually absorbing the information. So if you don't want to waste paper at home, you want to give your child the opportunity to sketch. This one is a great one to kind of just let your child calm down from the day or support reading if they're writing their creative materials. But drawing has a huge impact on the human, like how our health, our mental health and psychological well-being. So that's a good one to have at home as well. And lastly, I just want to say that we do have a lot of opportunities at Baker and Bloom where we can help support you specifically in whatever aspect that your child needs. We have our group classes that are available. Our group classes follow the same structure as the academic calendar, academic year, so that it's kind of that supplemental support system to make sure that we are covering all the gaps, all the learning gaps that your child may have. Right now, our modules, no matter if you're in kindergarten, your child in kindergarten or in grade 6, we are focusing on narrative writing. But each grade year band, kindergarten has a theme. Kindergarten are traditional tales, grade 1-2 is Once Upon a Time, grade 3-4 is My Personal Narrative, and grade 5-6 is Greek mythology. So we use different themes to support the concepts that we want to strengthen and develop. And all of the learning goals are aligned with the Common Core curriculum system, which is from the States. Also, we all have a personal project coaching. So if your student or if your child has an interest in a particular subject and wants to add something for their portfolio, this is a great way to do it. And then we also have private classes or one-on-one classes where we can specifically target whatever learning goals that you have for your child. So these are all ways that we can kind of help you, so at least you can keep the peace at home, and we will do our best to help support your child as best we can for this upcoming academic year. I will quickly, I guess, open up if there's any questions. please feel free to ask if you have any right now. Sorry, I just pulled up over here.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, sorry, I just asked a question on the
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Yes.
hi, this is Florence. Yeah. The online resources are great. The apps are great. Some of them they're using in school too. So I was just wondering, like, generally, how much time do you recommend for kids to have access to these apps, like per week or per day? So, like we want to balance screen time and not being addicted to apps, because we're trying to, like, they love the online programs. My daughter is turning 8. But the thing is, like, then the real books become more boring, so to speak. And I'm more of the traditional school where I feel like the actual books themselves inspire a lot of, creative thinking and visualization and, what's the advice there between apps versus the real books?
For sure. I think I would rely on the apps if I want the child to do it a bit more independently. But I do feel like so I'm always considering, when I am a mom, what would I want in my family structure? I think bedtime stories has a huge value. I think that it's great in it just to keep that parent and child bond. And I have a whole other, I have actually, if you're interested in the resources for at least the comprehension, the 5 different aspects to focus on for questioning, predicting, inferencing, and connecting, all those different aspects that we value in reading comprehension. Those are great ways. I have some books to recommend for that as well, in order to practice those skills. And those ones would rely on read aloud text between the parent and the student, the parent and the child. I'm sorry, my brain keeps thinking about student. I would recommend maybe whatever you're comfortable with for screen time. I don't want the reliance to be completely on screen time. Those apps were more like recommendations for your child to do independently at home. But I do think that there's a huge value in doing things with your child. I think that that helps the child realize that it's not like a one-off thing that they do by themselves, but it's a family thing where they're joining in. Sometimes it also is just a conversation. So like at home, when I was growing up, we had family dinner together every night, and we would have those discussions and talk about the day, and you would pick up your vocabulary from your parents as well. So I think just having those kind of social activities at home where it's not completely reliant on like worksheets or something like that. Board games are a great one. We also have for a previous talk, I made a resource about just like family activity to do in Hong Kong. It's a scavenger hunt that's focused on the humanity, and there's around 10 different sites all around Hong Kong, like the Peak, the Tsim Sha Tsui, like Harborfront, learning about the Hong Kong history. It was meant for the summer program, but if you're interested, we can send that over to you too. These are all ways that are not using the screen as the learning tool, but using like human experiences, because I think that, and it's also family bonding. I think that's super important as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would appreciate that. If you can also send the list of books
Yeah.
and also the scavenger hunt. Yeah, because I think you're right, like more active, to integrate the different styles and also encourage the literacy writing in probably a less traditional way. But it's actually very eye-opening for me to hear that, even audiobooks could really build up reading and writing, comprehension too. So because we always thought like book, but some kids are just not, only ready for all visual. So these ideas are great. Yeah, thank you so much. This talk has been really, really eye-opening, honestly.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, very eye-opening as parents.
Thank you. That's really nice. Thank you. I wanted to touch one more thing about audiobooks. So if you have a child that maybe reading is a struggle, audiobooks are like a great way to alleviate the stress of reading, but still enjoy stories. So just in case that's anybody, that's why I think the value of audiobooks, it's not just like a time killer for road trips. even though it could be, but it actually does have educational value, and it does support the child as well, or has the child in mind. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I think there are a few more questions. Sorry, there's one that says, how do I balance respecting the teacher's space to work with my child versus being engaged in my child's learning journey? Are drop-in calls ever too frequent? I think for this question, I think the first thing I would do if like, okay, I'm going to talk about the teacher perspective. As a teacher, I always wanted to make sure that my first point of contact was always positive with the parent. So maybe it's just a drop in on the first day or the first week sometime saying, oh, hi, I'm so-and-so, just a simple introduction, and then just kind of leaving it there. I wouldn't quite touch on all these questions on the first go. And I definitely wouldn't ask all 10 questions at the same time. I think once you kind of reflect and think, okay, which questions are the most important to ask right now? And most of the time, these things can be done at home and just best support. I probably would just maybe ask them one question from the 10 at the beginning of the year, and then wait till maybe the midterm mark to ask some of the other more pressing questions about the academics if you are noticing some things at home. So I think it does depend on the child and what their specific needs are. If you're noticing something right away, then I think maybe that conversation can take place earlier. But I do think that it is important to kind of pace it out. So it's not like a job interview where you're like, oh, what about this? And the child's teacher's like, whoa, that's a lot of questions. I think navigating that space and making sure that it's just maybe one or two questions at a time and not too intensely. It's just more of a conversation starter. I think that's the point of these questions, just to initiate the conversations to make sure that everyone is just best supporting the child. Sorry, I'm going to do one more. And how would your advice around these questions change as kids become teens and enter the high school years? I think for me, I would actually put a bit more of the responsibility on the child. I would just be more involved behind the scenes, because you do want to foster that independence, and you don't want your child to feel like, oh, I have to rely on my mom to ask these questions. My mom will take care of it for me. I think it is important to kind of navigate where your child is in terms of those leadership skills, and make sure that you are making them take responsibility for their learning as well. Not all of it. I don't think it's fair to say all of the responsibility, because they are kids, but just giving them the chance to maybe ask your child to ask their teacher, okay, how am I going to be assessed this year? Maybe not assessed. What tests am I going to have? How am I going to be graded? So if they're building that awareness for themselves, not you doing it for them. I know as a kid, like some teenagers, they're like, oh, I don't want to be told what to do. So if you ask them to ask their teacher, and so they have to, the responsibility is on them, I think that would go a long way, rather than you doing everything for them, because then you're giving them the space to be responsible, to problem solve and grow up. All right. Okay. If there's any other questions, please let me know. Or if a question kind of pops up towards the end, sorry, I'm going to put up our contact information, so you can feel free to email info@BNB, and then they will pass the question on to me, and I will also share the resources. So just let us know if you are interested in any of the materials I talked about, the 50 questions, the reading comprehension strategies, or the scavenger hunt. So just let us know and we can send them to you. All right. I know I went a little bit over time here, had a lot to talk about, but I had a great morning with you guys. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you guys again soon.